What's happening, fam? L.A.R. movement still moving. The book is entitled Lessons from a Non-Custodial Father at Amazon, Kindle, and CreateSpace. A link will be in the description box below as usual. This video is entitled How Drugs Built Cities. So, I was thinking, we talk about how slavery built this nation, excuse me, but we don't talk about how drugs built these cities. And we don't think about the effects of this, right? So, a drug, sugar used to be a drug, okay? So we don't count that anymore. But I'm gonna count stuff like this. Alcohol and tobacco is a drug, but we don't consider it. Alcohol, tobacco, and medication is a drug, but we don't consider it an illegal drug. But it's a drug nonetheless. Then we're talking about illegal drugs. So I don't think we take into consideration how historically drugs came into play. We don't take into consideration as much how, when we talk about America colonizing, this country being colonized, the history of the deals being made with Native Americans when they got them high. See, they lost their land because they got them drunk, got them high. And then, hey, man, they signed over. You told me I could have this. Yeah, we got it all on paper. See, that was a birth of a lot of cities. Drugs. You know, there's a story about Shaka Zulu that part of that downfall was at a point him meeting the colonizers, he started getting hooked on heroin. So if that's to be true, drugs. The reason I put both of them together, because I don't know the idiosyncrasies of that part like that, because I wasn't able to learn that part at this particular point. But I know I've read it numerous times in different ways. So some people said, some people downplayed it or whatever. That's what I mean. We don't talk about cities in America. First of all, we don't talk about, Tijuana is a city founded by Al Capone. He was a drug dealer. That's how they built that city. We don't talk about, Miami and Vegas are these great vacation spots. But we don't talk about how these cities really got built. Vegas, the mob, drug dealers. Miami, cocaine, drugs. This is what built that economy. Some of these modern cities right now, we call Chicago the second city because it was like a race ride, and after that, really, that's when the mob per se took over. So part of it being built the second time, drugs. Los Angeles, Hollywood. People talk about the crack era, but people forget about all of the years of Hollywood getting paid to promote alcohol and tobacco, drugs, and then promoting actual illegal drug activity and making it part of the entertainment in the movies. So they're like the spokesperson for drugs getting out, in a sense. It's part of, and part of Hollywood culture is drug culture. Part of L.A., a lot of L.A. things that people bring about up in L.A. have to do with drugs and gangs. The reason, and then right now we're in the heroin epidemic, we hide and call it the opioid epidemic, which is big pharma, or pharmaceuticals. For years, pharmaceutical companies have their own cities and states and blah, 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 built off of, drugs. Getting people hooked on things that they don't need. Creating side effects that make you need more drugs, that make you pay more for drugs. Or if you come down and you can't afford the drug anymore, you wind up getting on a different, cheaper drug, or even an illegal drug, or what we call self-medicating. All of this creates money in an economy, and all of these economies have cities. You get what I'm saying? We don't talk about alcohol. We don't talk about how Kentucky is known for what? Bourbon, right? So there's a city built that supplies America with Kentucky bourbon, right? Or Jack Daniels whiskey, whatever you want to say. Drugs. You know, Mississippi was known for drugs. No, I'm sorry. Let me see. Well, yeah, tobacco. Because we talk about slavery, we talk about cotton, but people forget about sugar and tobacco. And people forget, the Lehman Brothers was in Alabama, I want to say. And they came from slavery. I think their slave trade was actually tobacco to moving to New York. So, in essence, if that's the case, I might be wrong, but drugs. So they took their money, they Lehman Brothers tobacco drug money, and built a financial institution. Now, one of my favorite movies is Inside Man, and I forgot how the lady said it in the movie, Baba something, when she was talking to either the banker or Denzel Washington, and they translated it because she said it in that language, or the banker said it in that language, and it translated to when there's blood on the streets, buy land. When we talk about gentrification, what drives down the prices of home values are drugs. When you talk about drug dealing, real estate is involved. Drug dealing and real estate have always been synonymous. I think it was that book with Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, when they said something about what is Ray Kroc in business for doing. And Ray Kroc was the owner of McDonald's. He was like, he's in the business of selling burgers. The guy was like, no, he's in the real estate business. Drug dealers will tell you about real estate. They need good real estate. Location, right? So location is good for drugs, or good for having a spot to hide your drugs and not get caught for drug dealing and manufacturing and whatnot. So that makes it easier. And a lot of cultures are built around this ideology. Now, because the drug culture brings violence, it drives down the property value, and then people who are normally the richer of whatever group comes and buys the land for cheap, builds it up again. Those people move somewhere else, and they bring their drug habits with them, right? And they, buy overpriced land because they're getting priced out. So now they're paying on that end, and they're driving down the property value. And 20, 30 years go by, here we go, and we do it again. And how is that done? Drugs. And people don't, put two and two together at times. Also, we don't talk about how much addiction costs. If your drug of choice is cigarettes and alcohol, depends on how bad your habit is, it's going to be quite expensive. See, that addiction in itself has an economy. Addiction has an economy in America, and we talk about the underworld economy, but really the underworld economy that builds cities is addiction. When we talk about the prison industrial complex, people being locked up for drugs. When you talk about the debt that these cities are in, who decide to make drugs legal, what is getting them out of debt? Dealing drugs to rebuild the city. So their cities are getting rebuilt off of drugs. This is part of the reason why people say black men don't be the face of this heroin epidemic, because all they're gonna do is make you the bad guy while they're rebuilding these cities in debt and who are destitute on drugs, and now they make it look legal when it was once illegal, right? This is part of changing the drug laws and the drug rules and the perception of people on drugs racially. Nobody takes into consideration even say what people like Diddy, 50, Jay-Z, I think Young Jeezy, rappers in general being the face of alcohol brands. Because the type of music they do and those faces popping up when I say certain things, they are indirectly being the face of alcoholism, because in the hood they say, we always say it's two things in the hood for sure: a church and a liquor store. And that's a problem. But in the suburbs, alcohol addiction and abuse is way worse. So you're gonna need to diversify the faces of drugs. You need somebody to blame, because see, Hennessy doesn't have a face per se, but you see they try to make their face darker and darker. Vodka doesn't have a face. We know it comes from Russia. Cognac, France. A lot of these drinks have countries that go with them. You get what I'm saying? Sake is Asia, so stuff like that. Wine, France and these places and that places. So we associate, and alcohol as a drug is glorified. Like it's a classy drug. It's like cocaine in the 80s. Cocaine was classy, but crack was dirty. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that. Also, excuse me for a second. We don't think about how society puts our kids on medical drugs to get them used to addiction earlier. So when they become adults, they'll pick a habit, because that keeps the economy going. Now, even when we talk about us black people in our communities, and our financially being crippled by this country, we never take into consideration that part of our success with Reconstruction, part of even our success with instituting Jim Crow, and part of our successes during Jim Crow and the things we built, and the cities that we built, and the schools that we built, and the hospitals we built, and the economy that we built, maybe that up until maybe around the 80s, were all more so prevalent on the fact that we stayed away from drugs. The simple term was keep your nose clean. See, because we weren't on drugs as much, we were far more productive. And then you think about Nixon, the Nixon thing that came out maybe a year, 2 years ago, that part of the drug trade was to put drugs in black communities. You think about all the movie depictions of, give the drugs to the blacks, they're animals, that type of stuff. That was basically to stop us as from building cities. So the people who wanted to stop us from building cities was using those same proceeds to create cities. And now, even when we have this racial dynamic, the issue with non-blacks is they don't have consequences for being drug addicts and drug dealers. So their problems with drugs is exponential, because there are no issues, because there's an economy for rehabilitation. There's an economy for lawyers and doctors and police officers, the DEA, the ATF. The war on drugs never really did anything but create jobs, which help generate money to build cities. The idea to give police officers jobs, give correctional officers jobs, which built cities. They've actually built prisons in places in America as a form of a city's economy. Some worked, some didn't. And which is an offshoot of what? The war on drugs and the drug trade. So if we need to take these things into consideration holistically and how it has a history of doing this, because if you're not paying attention, you're gonna repeat this cycle, and people keep repeating this cycle because they don't think about people have a vested interest in people being addicted to drugs, dealing drugs, and profiting off of drugs because the capitalism of drugs builds cities. So we out, man. Peace.